solving radical equations, this will not involve taking any square roots like we've done up to this point. So you will probably find this as a fairly simple lesson, I think. Okay. Certainly it can get more complicated in another upper level math class, but what we're going to be doing in here is not so bad. There is definitely a set of rules to follow though, okay? So the first thing you have to do is get the radical variable term all by itself. So you want to get the radical alone on the one side of the equation, okay? Once you do that, you're going to square both sides of the equation. Square both sides of the equation. When you square a square root, it gets rid of the radical. So for example, if I took the square root of 7 times the square root of 7, that gives me the square root of 49, which is just 7. Okay? So the same is true with a variable. When you square a radical, it just gives you what's underneath. Okay? So we start this first one. You have to get that radical by itself first. So that means that I'm going to subtract 11 to do that. So I end up with the square root of x equals 10. Once the radical is by itself, the radical term, it might just have an x, it might be bigger like the next one, okay, but once the radical is by itself, then you're going to square both sides. When you square a square root, so when I take the square root of x and I square it, I just get what's underneath, just that x, equals 10 squared, 100. X is by itself, so that is my answer. That's it. All right, next question. I have to get the radical by itself. So this is what I need by itself. It is. Okay? The whole radical term needs to be alone on one side of the equal sign. So once that happens, you're going to square both sides. So when I take the square root of x plus 5 and square it, I just get what's underneath, x plus 5. And on the right side, 5 squared, 5 times 5 is 25. And then I solve for x. On this one, x is not by itself after I did that, like the last one. So I'm going to minus 5. And x equals 20. It's just solving. You're solving for the value of x. Like I said, you're not actually going to be taking any square roots of stuff like we've been doing. All right, so we're going to isolate the variable radical. So there it is. It's done. It's isolated. It's by itself. So that means we're ready to square both sides. So the square root squared just gives you what's under that radical, x minus 5. 2 square root 3 squared is the same thing as taking 2 square root 3 times 2 square root 3. I'll go ahead and write this out, but you could actually just punch that into your calculator with parentheses though, okay? It's going to give me 12. So if you go to your calculator, parentheses, put in 2 square root 3 squared, you get 12. What's really happening there is you're taking it and giving 2 square root 3 times 2 square root 3, which is 4 square root 9, which is 4 times 3, which is my 12. And then add 5 to get excellent. Anna.
So could you do like 2 squared, which equals 4, and then you just multiply it by the one that's under the square root?
Yep. That'll work every time. Okay, in my next one here, isolate this radical first. You have to do that step first. So to do that, get that by itself, I'm going to add 2. So then I have 3x equals 9. 7 plus 2. Once that radical is by itself, you are ready to square. So I'm going to square both sides. And I get the square root squared, gives you what's underneath. 9 squared is 81. And then divide by 3. And x is 27.
Is this what we do the whole time?
Mm-hmm. For all, I mean, this goal 10-5? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Okay, next question. Isolate the radical. So that means I have to add 1/3. So I'm going to have the square root of x equals. I would put this as an improper fraction. 1 plus 1/3 is 1 1/3 or 4/3. Don't do a decimal for sure. Because it's easier to square when it's improper than when it's a mixed. Yes?
I thought you would just change the 1 into like 1 over 1.
1 over what? 1 over 1? Mm-hmm.
So, but then it would be 2 over 4.
No, because I'm going to add 1 over 1 to 1/3. So if I have to 1 over 1 plus 1/3, I have to make this a 3.
Oh, okay.
So that's going to be 3 over 3. And 1 over 3, there's my 4/3. Now that the radical is by itself, you can square both sides. The square root of x squared just gives me that x. 4/3 squared just means to square the 4 square the 3. 16 over 9.
And that's it.
That's it. All right. Isolate this radical, which means I'm going to get rid of that 4 by doing what?
Dividing.
Divide. Good. When it's right next to that, that means multiplication. So to undo it, we're going to divide it. 16 divided by 4 is 4. Then we are ready to square both sides. So the square root of 2x squared is 2x. 4 squared is 16. And then divide by 2. And x is 8. Anything to ask so far? Anything you want to ask on that? After the assessment you just took, I think you'll find this kind of simple. Okay, on this next one, isolate the radical. Yay, it is. I don't have to do anything. Square both sides. So the square root squared just gives you what's under the radical symbol. 3 squared is 9. And then solve that for x. So subtract your 2. So 5x equals 7. And divide by 5. And I get 7/5 or 1.4. Good decimal, so a decimal's good to have for an answer.
Could it be like 1 over and 1 2/5?
It can be. All right, isolate the radical. So that means I got to get rid of a +1, so I'm going to -1. So 4 minus x equals 7. Then I'm going to square both sides. So 4 minus x, square root squared, just gives you what's underneath the radical. Anytime you square a square root, no matter what's under it, you just get that. 7 squared is 49. Subtract that 4. So negative x equals 45. Never leave it negative x, remember, so divide by negative 1. X is a negative 45. All the solving part, we've done and done and done and done. The squaring part, that's new. Okay, I want to isolate that radical. What am I going to do to isolate that radical? Drew?
Subtract 7.
Subtract 7 first. So 2x plus 1 equals 5. Oh, sorry, I forgot my square root. Equals 5. Now I square both sides. So the square root squared gives you what's underneath. 2x plus 1 equals 5 squared is 25. And then continue solving. Subtract your 1 and divide by 2. Oops, sorry about that. And my last one is the trickiest one. You have to get that radical by itself. So what's the first step? Because there's actually 2, and you've got to do them in the right order. It matters. Anna?
You're going to do that
Minus 1 first. All right, minus your 1 first.
Why is it important to subtract it first?
Because otherwise you're going to end up with fractions. Because if you divide by 3, you got to take 13 divided by 3 and 1 divided by 3. You don't want to do that. So subtract that 1 first. Then, we're still trying to get this by itself, then do your divide 3. Now that radical is by itself, so you're ready to square both sides. So the square root squared gives you what's underneath. 4 squared, 16. And then get x alone by adding 9. And x is 25. If you wanted to, I'm not asking you to do this, but every answer is checkable too. Okay? Every answer is checkable. So if I took my 25 and plugged it in, 25 minus 9 is 16. The square root of 16 would be 4. 4 times that 3 would be 12. Plus 1 does give me 13. Okay? And that would be the case of any of the questions, any of the solving. Every answer is checkable. Okay, question.